I'm Anita. Standing in the cold December snow, the soft glow of my daughter's house windows behind me, I clutch a warm pumpkin pie to my chest. The silence is only broken by the howl of the wind and the occasional drop of snow hitting the ground. That night, my once close relationship with my daughter Emily shattered into pieces. Earlier that morning, a text from her at 3:07 a.m. jolted me awake. In the pitch dark of my small apartment, the winter wind seemed like a relentless intruder, scratching at the windows. My heart raced as I opened the message. The brightness of the screen hurt my eyes, and then I read, "Mom, Diana doesn't feel right having you at Christmas this year. It's better if you stay away. Please understand." I couldn't believe my eyes. I rubbed them hard, thinking it was a cruel dream. I read the message over and over, and with each read, the room felt like it was closing in on me. I glanced at the framed photo on my nightstand, a picture of Emily and her husband Alex, standing in front of the beautiful house I'd bought for them with my life savings of $350,000. This was the house where I was no longer welcome during the holidays. A numbing shock washed over me, not anger yet, just a profound sense of betrayal. As dawn broke, I didn't rush to make my usual cup of coffee. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of the long night still pressing down on me. Emily's message kept flashing in my mind. Even after hours of trying to make sense of it, the whole thing felt like an endless nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept this heart-breaking news to myself. I was too ashamed to tell my sister, my neighbor, or the ladies in my knitting club. Silence seemed like the safest option. I slowly got dressed, putting on the same old sweater I'd had for years, and moved as if on autopilot. Driving to work, I noticed details I'd never cared about before: the frost on the grass, the low-hanging gray sky, and the cold December that seemed to be gripping every rooftop. These little things reminded me of the tough winters when it was just Emily and me against the world. When she was 16, we lived in a small rental house that smelled of old rugs and bleach. I'd come home late from my second job, exhausted, and find her huddled over her homework, wrapped in a blanket. The heater barely worked, but I'd sit by her side, rubbing my hands for warmth and pretending everything was okay so she wouldn't worry. I promised myself back then that I'd give her a stable and secure life. I didn't want her to experience the same upheaval I felt after her father passed away. That promise became my guiding star for the next 15 years. I worked overtime, cut back on vacations, and saved every penny I could. I thought it was only temporary, a sacrifice that every loving mother makes willingly. But looking back, I realized I'd lost sight of myself in the process. The turning point came when Emily met Alex at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. She introduced him to me with a shy and excited smile I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. Alex was polite, shaking my hand firmly and looking me in the eye as he asked about my day. I liked him right away. Little did I know that his mother, Diana, would bring so much change into our lives. One evening, I prepared a special dinner for the four of us. I set the table with my most precious dishes, hand-me-down china with a delicate gold rim that I only used for really important occasions. I wanted everything to be warm and inviting. When Diana arrived, she was dressed in a fur-trimmed coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, and her perfume filled the air before she even greeted me. She walked into my home with a critical eye, as if sizing up a hotel that didn't meet her standards. "It's cozy," she said, but her smile was forced. "It reminds me of my dorm room, though that one had better lighting." Emily gave me a weak smile, trying to smooth things over. I swallowed my hurt and told myself that some people just didn't know how to be tactful. A year later, their wedding was a grand affair. But Diana took over every detail. The hall was decorated to look like it belonged in a high-end magazine, with elaborate flower arrangements and linen tablecloths. I'd paid for Emily's wedding dress and a large part of the catering from my carefully saved nest egg, but during the toast, Alex only thanked Diana for making the wedding perfect. My contribution was completely overlooked. I forced a smile, just like mothers do at their children's weddings, even when their hearts are a little broken. Shortly after the wedding, the topic of buying a house came up. With the high prices, down payments, and mortgage approvals, Emily and Alex were stressed out. I could see the worry in Emily's eyes when she said, "Maybe we'll have to rent forever." The protective mother in me couldn't stand to see her so worried. So, I calmly offered to help, even though it meant emptying my savings account. The real estate agent suggested putting the house in my name until they were more financially stable. Emily hugged me so tightly that I could feel her heart pounding. She promised me that there would always be a room for me in their new home. I believed her wholeheartedly. When they moved in, I painted one of the bedrooms a soft lavender color and put up a handmade quilt on the bed. I daydreamed about spending lazy weekends in that house, sipping tea with Emily in the kitchen like we used to. But on the very first day, Diana arrived with a truck full of expensive furniture. She stood in the doorway of my room and wrinkled her nose. "This old sofa looks out of place," she said. "You should put it in the shed until you can get something nicer." Emily agreed without hesitation. I tried to convince myself that it was just a piece of furniture and that it didn't matter. But as time went by, more and more changes took place. Our Sunday morning coffee dates started to get cancelled. The holidays were planned by Diana's family, and Emily would always ask me to be flexible just this once. My room gradually filled with storage boxes that weren't mine. By November, I felt like a stranger in a house I'd bought for them. But I kept my mouth shut, waiting for the right moment to talk to Emily, though such quiet moments became harder and harder to find. It seemed like she was getting more and more wrapped up in Diana's world, a polished and perfect world that I just didn't fit into. One afternoon, right before the Christmas season, I accidentally saw them in the supermarket. Emily and Diana were standing in front of the Christmas decorations. I was about to wave to them when I heard Diana say in a low voice, "She means well, but your mother just doesn't fit in with our crowd. Everything is so awkward when she's around." Emily didn't say a word. She just nodded, a small, defeated nod that cut me deeper than any harsh words could have. I turned around and walked out of the store without even getting my groceries. My hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold onto the shopping cart. That drive home was a blur. I finally admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding for months. I loved my daughter more than anything in the world, but somewhere along the way, I'd become an outsider in her life. For days after that incident, the memory haunted me like a deep, hidden wound. Every time I replayed Diana's words in my head, I felt another crack in my already fragile heart. But it was Emily's silence that hurt the most. It was as if agreeing with Diana was easier for her than standing up for me. I didn't confront her right then. I was afraid of what she might say, and some truths are just too painful to hear. I told myself that she was just tired from her long shifts at the hospital, caught between two people she cared about. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, like any loving mother would. But then came that fateful 3:07 a.m. Text, and all the pain and frustration I'd been burying inside me came flooding to the surface. After work that day, I sat in my car outside my apartment for a long time. The sky was already dark, and the December night seemed to shrink the world around me. The windows of my apartment glowed faintly, but I wasn't ready to go inside. I opened the folder that held all the documents related to the house, the deed, the receipts, the insurance papers. The deed had my name printed boldly at the top. I traced my fingers over the letters, remembering the day I signed them, thinking I was securing a bright future for Emily. Instead, I'd bought myself a lonely seat on the sidelines of her life. As I stared at the deed, a thought crept into my mind, sharp and unwelcome. If I wasn't welcome in that house, if I was no longer part of that world, then why was I still shouldering the emotional and financial burden? Why was I paying a price for a place where I'd been slowly pushed out? This thought scared me. It seemed so extreme, so final. But once it took root in my mind, it wouldn't go away. 2 days later, I made an appointment with a local lawyer, Mr. Thompson. His office was in an old, creaky building downtown. The waiting room was filled with worn-out chairs and out-of-date magazines, but there was something honest and real about the place. When he called me in, I sat across from him at a large wooden desk that looked like it had been there for decades. I slid the deed across the desk, hoping my hands weren't shaking too visibly. He put on his glasses and read through the documents carefully. "So, the house is in your name?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "And your daughter and her husband are living there rent-free?" I swallowed hard. It was never supposed to be formal. I just wanted to help them. He nodded slowly. "You're the legal owner. You have the right to sell, transfer, or reclaim the property, as long as you give the proper notice to the occupants." The word reclaim hit me hard. I didn't feel powerful or vindicated. I just felt utterly exhausted. He must have seen the change in my face because he leaned back and said gently, "You're not obliged to keep supporting a situation that's hurting you." "I don't want to punish them," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't want to be that kind of mother." He shook his head. "It's not punishment. It's setting boundaries, and sometimes boundaries seem harsh when they're long overdue." I stared at my hands for a long time. "If I decide to sell, what happens?" I asked. He explained the process in a clear and professional manner: the quick sales, the investors who buy properties as they are, the timelines, and the notice requirements. I stepped outside the building after he finished and sat on a stone ledge near the sidewalk. People were going about their daily lives around me, but I felt like I was on the brink of doing something irreversible. It was a strange feeling. Deciding to take care of myself was scarier than constantly putting others first. I'd spent so many years being a mother, a helper, and a support that I barely recognized the woman considering this big change. That night, I spread all the house documents on my kitchen table. The silence in my apartment was so thick that I could hear the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking. I stared at the papers until the numbers blurred together. Then, I finally picked up the phone. I called a real estate buyer who specialized in quick home purchases for rental properties. The man on the other end of the line had a calm voice and didn't ask too many questions. He said they could come for an assessment the next morning. I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. When they arrived at the house the next day, they walked through it with a critical eye, making notes on their clipboards. I stayed outside on the sidewalk, looking at the windows where Emily used to wave at me when she was a child. So many memories came flooding back. Now, the curtains were different, the furniture was new, and the whole atmosphere had changed beyond recognition. The buyer made an offer. It was lower than the market value, but a part of me was relieved. It was a way to cut ties with a place that no longer felt like home. I signed the sales agreement 2 days later. My hand trembled as the pen touched the paper, and a single tear fell on the corner of the document. I quickly wiped it away, feeling embarrassed even though there was no one to see me. After the sale, I had to figure out how to deliver the notice legally. I knew it would come as a shock to Emily, and the thought almost crushed me. She'd always been the center of my world. But the truth was, she'd stopped choosing me long before I started to think about choosing myself. I called Mr. Thompson again and asked him to arrange for an official processed server to deliver the notice on Christmas Eve when Emily and Alex would be home. There was a long pause on the line. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, but he simply said, "If that's your decision, we'll proceed." My decision. Those words echoed in my head. For so many years, I'd made decisions based on what was best for others. Holding this decision in my hands, heavy as it was, felt both unfamiliar and empowering. In the days leading up to Christmas, my chest ached with a mix of dread and determination. I went to work, made my meals, and attended my art classes at the community center, pretending that everything was normal. But inside, a storm was brewing. On December 24th, I baked a pumpkin pie. I wasn't sure if anyone would eat it, but baking had always been my way of calming my nerves. The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg filled my apartment, bringing back memories of happier holidays. When it was time to go to Emily's house, I stood at my front door for a long time, holding the warm pie. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. I looked older than I remembered, with tired eyes and a mouth that seemed to hold so many unspoken words. But there was also a new sense of determination in my eyes, a glimmer of the woman I'd been before I lost myself in motherhood. As I locked the door behind me, snowflakes started to fall gently. I didn't know what would happen when I stepped into that house, but I knew that things between Emily and me would never be the same again. That realization gave me the strength to walk all the way to their front door. When I opened the door later that night and stepped out into the snow, it was falling even harder. The cold air rushed into my coat as if it had been waiting for me. I stood on the walkway for a while, still holding the warm pie. Inside, there were voices, raised in confusion and surprise. But I didn't turn back. I walked to my car, brushed the snow off the windshield, and drove into the night, letting the headlights cut through the white out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my small living room with the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly. It should have been a lonely scene, but instead, it felt honest. For the first time in years, I didn't have to stay quiet to keep the peace or shrink myself to make others comfortable. I held on to this strange feeling of freedom, even though it came with a deep, aching sadness. I kept my phone on silent, even though it lit up over and over again with calls and texts from Emily. I couldn't bring myself to answer. The words I'd said at dinner kept echoing in my mind, not with regret but with a painful clarity. I'd spent so long waiting for someone to choose me that I'd forgotten how to choose myself. On the afternoon of the 26th, there was a soft knock at my door. I knew it was Emily. She stood outside, looking small in her winter coat, her eyes red and her face pale. When I opened the door, she stepped inside and wrapped her arms around herself as if she was unsure if she had the right to be there. "Mom," she whispered, sitting down on my couch. "I didn't know you were so unhappy." I sat across from her, folding my hands, and waited. She looked down at her lap for a long time before speaking again. "I let things get out of hand," she said. "I was just trying to keep everyone happy, and I didn't realize what I was doing to you. I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked, and something in me softened. "I didn't want to hurt you," I told her. But I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when I was slowly disappearing from your life. She wiped her eyes. "You didn't disappear. I got caught up in what Diana wanted. It was easier to go along than to fight. But that wasn't fair to you. There was so much more we could have said, but sometimes, the simplest truths are the most powerful." She reached out and took my hand, holding it tightly as if to make sure I was real. Over the next few weeks, I helped Emily and Alex move into a small apartment across town. They didn't ask for money, and I didn't offer. We packed boxes side by side, labeled them with markers, and loaded them into a borrowed truck. Diana came by once to try and take control of the move, but Emily gently told her that she needed some space. Diana left without an argument, and for the first time, I saw a real change. Winter turned into spring, and life slowly became more peaceful. I went back to my art classes at the community center, made new friends, and took long walks in the park. Emily visited often, sometimes with Alex and sometimes alone. Our conversations became light-hearted again, filled with real connection. 2 years later, on Christmas Eve, I walked into their new apartment with another pumpkin pie. This time, Emily greeted me with a big smile and led me to the seat next to hers. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, just a warm welcome. During dinner, Alex raised his glass. "To Anita," he said, "for teaching us that love isn't real without respect." As Emily leaned against my shoulder and whispered that she was expecting a baby, my throat tightened, and the room filled with a warm glow. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home, not because of a house but because of the people who had finally learned to love and respect me.